Polypede here, coming to you once again with One Piece chapter 1168 entitled Elbaf Snow, and this one kind of got me, y'all. Okay, so we start the chapter off with the efforts of King Harold actually working, and this is 15 years ago in the same year. So, all across the world, people are getting imports from Elbaf, including seafood and lumber. And who do we see shipping lumber but Amit? We saw Amit quite a few times in the story at this point. We've seen him and his shipping company because we first see him in Whole Cake during the Tea Party, and we've seen his shipping company during a conversation between Lafitte and Blackbeard, and we see him pull up to Egghead in the past during the Kuma flashback. So yeah, his shipping company is very well known and renowned apparently. And he's shipping Elbaf cedar. So these just seem to be normal trees that are around Elbaf, probably in the underworld, I would think, seeing as how they seem to be highly valued and the underworld has a pretty dangerous reputation, as that's the first thing people see. So it has a very scary connotation. So because of that scary connotation, perhaps the trees are valuable. Don't know. But anyway, continuing, Harold is pretty pleased that he's turned things around, and he's very excited to be a part of the world government in the future. But what's so eerie about Harold's way of pacifism here and his want of peace is that he's forgetting his Albathian roots to be a part of something that he knows very little about, despite being to Marijois so many times. And it's so weird that he's so convincing to his fellow Albathian people that they start to drink his Kool-Aid. They start to catch his vibe. Because as he's presenting his wants of the future to the people of Elbaf, someone in the crowd says, yeah, let's ditch this warrior crap. Which is a bit unnerving because now the people like Harold are starting to lose their way in the sake of peace, but in that want of peace, they're forgetting their own culture, which is going to be Harold's undoing as the chapter goes on. But this takes us to the Warrior School in which Saul and Harold are talking. And Saul is appreciative of the improvements in Elbaf, but even he is a bit uneasy about how quickly things are changing, because he says, but ain't you afraid you've lost something here, Harold? But Harold replies, I don't believe that military power is what makes a country strong anymore. And that's a big mistake, and it speaks volumes coming from Saul, because we don't know what exactly happened after the O'Hara incident up to now. But before the O'Hara incident popped off, Saul had a very, very strong prejudice against Albathian giants, like Ida did back before she met Harold. So it's weird now that Harold is being met with pushback by a man who previously didn't think much of Albathian giants, which is another reason why I keep thinking that Saul and Ida have to be related. Maybe, maybe not. That has never been confirmed, but maybe it will be in the future. We'll have to see. However, speaking of Ida, Ida has passed, and Harold owes everything he has learned to her, and we see her tombstone. And upon seeing this tombstone, I thought of Loki. Because in this way, it is confirmed that Loki has lost everything but his older brother, who up to this current point shuns him because he thought he killed their father. And it is getting heavy. Loki is being built up like a straw hat. I'll just say that. Because this is crazy. It's crazy. The last scene we see of Ida is her talking with Harold, and they're just chatting about how much improvement that Harold has made to the country, and Harold is gung-ho about doing more. And this is where you get to start to see how far Harold has gone in the wrong direction, because he says the old customs, our backwards traditions, all those bad practices from the warrior era will be thrown away. This is not poorly intentioned, but it has terrible connotations. And even Ida sees this too, after spending so much time on Elbaf, and even after all she's been through, even after being poisoned by the people of Elbaf, technically, she responds, "Oh, but I kind of like the whole Warrior's Pride part. It's really cool. You should cherish your culture." She tells the man this to his face in a very unwell disposition. And Harold says, "Don't you get it, Ida? It's that very culture that's kept us from marrying. I can't accept it." Which, to his credit, I see why he's so determined to change things, because of the laws of Elbaf. He was never with his one true love. And I can kind of see why he saw things the way he saw them. And he was so determined to change things in a particular way so he could finally have his own happiness. That makes sense, but he's going too far about it. And then that's when Ida agrees, and they share a moment, and they talk about Loki and how she always had him in her heart as Howardin's little kid brother, and they share a laugh about that. And she says, "Times like these keep my heart full, but you'll always be everyone's king, Harold." And Harold instills in her hope that they'll travel around the world again, like back in the old days, like at the start of the flashback. Ida agrees. Harold holds her hand as she puts her hand in his hand, and her hand slips, and that's it. That's actually it. She's gone like that. Otis cooking with this. This felt like a movie. Oh, man. I know it's cheesy, but that got me, dog. That's crazy. Oh, Elbaf is a great arc. Oh, man. No, it's good. It's good. This hurts. Howardin and the others rush in as Harold leaves out, his hand over his face. He's in shambles. Howardin sees his mother has passed away. Howardin is in shambles. And then we cut to Loki, who has been imprisoned, and he just sits there by himself. The snow is falling, and Loki tips his hat so no one can see his tears. Cinema, absolute cinema. I do think Loki's going to join the crew because this is too much detail for a mere secondary character, but I don't know. However, I did do videos about him getting a shrinking fruit, and that shrinking paramecia fruit being the legendary fruit of Elbaf that people keep talking about. So go watch those videos. They'll be linked around here somewhere. But yeah, that leads us into 14 years later, in which Harold finds himself in Mary Schwa, and apparently Shanks was supposed to be knighted and become a holy knight. However, he has gone missing, and he had one more mission to go before he was knighted. I wonder what they asked him to do. They must have asked him to do something heinous. His whole MO is quite odd, because we'll get into some talk a little later, but things are looking kind of suspicious as we move forward. Anyway, Harold is brought to the room in which the empty throne lies, and talks about how when the world government inducts Elbaf, he's going to step down as ruler and someone will take his place. However, this is disagreed with by Emu. As Emu says, that is a matter for Mu to decide. Harold freaks out because he has never seen someone atop the empty throne. And that is when Harold gets his depths contract. What I did not know is that the translation of the various contracts or covenants has changed. So he originally had a Shallows covenant, which is the minor seal, and we learn about that in 1167. What he has now, presumably, is a depths contract, which makes him a full-fledged holy knight. We've seen this mark on Killingham's armband before. So now Harold has that mark. And this is the mark that gives those with it immortality. So by that, I'm guessing that means the regeneration, because it's weird that people presumably with this seal, meaning the Holy Knights, specifically Garling and Somers, do age, because we see them in this flashback and they're way younger than they are in the present. I don't think it's immortality in the traditional sense. I think you get old up to a point and then perhaps you stop aging. So maybe you live long enough to become a old gentleman and then aging just stops, or maybe you could choose that. I'm not sure, because Gunko knows Brooke, which means she's over 90 years old and she hasn't aged. So I don't know what that actually means. What does immortality mean when it comes to these marks? And it seems like they brand him like a cow, which is funny because he used to have horns. But yeah, it's weird how they brand Harold in this way. And it has to be painful because he yelps so loud that the castle shakes. So yeah, I don't know. The Abyssal contract, I think, has to be the thing that the five elders have, because the magic circles, the abyss pentagrams, as Emu describes them here, are different when used by Gunko as opposed to when they are used by the five elders. And from this chapter, we find out that they have to be pre-made before a person can use them as a kind of warp gate, because Emu leaves off with saying to Harold that now that you are an immortal Holy Knight sworn to Emu, you have to carve an abyss pentagram in Elbaf, which will seal the covenant between us. That is crazy. And after all this talk, Harold doesn't think it's fishy that Emu is very devil-coded. That's why I think, and I made a video about this too, that Emu has the bad fruit model devil, and it's a mythical zone fruit on par with Nika. I think that because Emu has been nothing but devil-coded throughout this entire flashback. But when Harold goes back home, however, we see something odd. His ship has Elbaf on it and it's Romanized. However, Elbaf is spelled with an F here instead of a PH. So it's really weird what the official spelling of the country is. I like Elbaf with an F personally because it's just Fable spelled backwards, and we as a community have lived with that for like decades at this point, and it just seems appropriate. But yeah, he goes back home. He does the deed of putting a pentagram in the throne room, of which we've seen already in Ort's castle. We've seen this. And apparently once you have the contract, Emu can just talk to the person within their head telepathically, which is odd. So with the Abyssal contract, it seems like it gives people the ability to talk to each other telepathically without Emu, because we see that between the five elders during Egghead. So maybe that's another distinction. I'm not sure. But yeah, he's talking to Emu, and Emu says to him, as he's sitting on his throne, mobilize the entire nation and form a grand army of warriors. The giant warrior fleet will stand alongside the Marines and serve the world as. And that's when Harold cuts Emu off and says, no, no, no. Harold is so gullible. This is hard. This is so hard. And he is pleading with Emu constantly. Like, I'll give you the warriors that want to fight, but please spare my people. And his guardsmen are freaking out, like, who is he talking to? That's when we get this wild panel of these hypnotic Emu eyes looming over Harold as Emu says, thou vowed to atone for Elbaf's history, even at the cost of becoming a slave. Yeah, eat your words, Harold. You said too much. You broke your horns over nothing. You broke your pride over nothing. That's what horn breaking really does mean in One Piece, because every time that happens, it seems like the one who got their horns broken lost a bit of themselves, and Harold inflicted that upon himself. Oh, he's such a tool, bruh. I get what he's trying to do, but my goodness. This is a hard read. And Harold argues back as to say, I meant to carry that burden alone. But Emu's like, no, no, no. The burden of history is too heavy for one man to bear alone. So hold your tongue, young boy. Obey me, which is crazy. And Emu insists in saying, thou cannot disobey Mu. And Emu starts to control Harold's body through the covenant. Oh no, bro. Those who enter into the deep sea covenant, which is the Depths covenant, may gain immortality and power, but it comes at the cost of total obedience. Thou wilt carry out Mu's orders regardless of thine own will. Harold's body begins to be controlled, and he starts to panic. And he realizes that he has been fooled this entire time and calls for his guards. And I think this is where the misunderstanding comes in, because he begs his guards to chain him to the pillar and to summon his sons and Jarl. And that is where we end up on in chapter 1152. Because in chapter 1152, we see various guardsmen skewering Harold. And from the looks of the silhouette, I think he was being Dami reversied, because it looks like Mu or Emu was trying to lure Harold towards the pentagram to perform Dami reversi or to take over Harold, because that's probably why he's in silhouette here in chapter 1152. And the guardsmen were skewering Harold probably part way through the transformation. So that's how they ended up killing him, presumably. Because it's weird that if all the Holy Knights have the immortality power and they recover quickly from mortal injury, it's weird that he died here. So maybe there's a loophole to that or something. But what's also interesting in that very chapter, 1152, we know that at this time, Shanks is on the island. And this is the very chapter in which we see Shanks' tattoo, of which I thought had a connection to Emu, but we know now that's the Shallows Covenant. So I wonder, and a lot of people have been talking about this, how deep is Shanks playing chess? Because he either got his arm bitten off on purpose by the Lord of the Coast in order to rid himself completely of the covenant, or that may not matter, because we have seen in various chapters in Elbaf that if you mortally wound a person with a contract, they can recover. We don't know about people with Shallows contracts or Shallows covenants, but I wonder if it's the same thing. I wonder, was this a futile attempt to rid himself of the covenant, but it can come back at any time? I wonder what that means, because if it does just dissipate, if the limb of which it was imprinted on is severed, that would mean that he was playing 4D chess and he did let that Sea King bite his arm off. But now it makes you think, was the whole kidnapping orchestrated? How much of chapter 1 was fake is what I'm getting at. I really want to know, because it doesn't seem like happy circumstance now. It doesn't seem like a coincidence anymore. It seems like most of this was orchestrated. Like, how far does this rabbit hole go? But yeah, continuing on with the chapter, this is when, of course, Loki is free from prison, and he and Jarl go to the castle to visit Harold, and that's what leads us back to 1152. And we have a break next week, which sucks. But yeah, there's just a lot to think about. I really do wonder how much of chapter 1 was orchestrated now by Shanks, because it doesn't add up. Man, Elbaf is important. Well, with that being said, I got you covered during the week with more One Piece content to come. Give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?